Well, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. The last session on the last day, and you chose to spend it with me. I really appreciate it. My name is Chris Dias. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio team, and I am the program manager for Visual Studio Online, codenamed Monaco. And you may have heard a little bit about it earlier in this week, and Eric Gamma had a talk about TypeScript. Really, it's the basis for what we build Monaco in. So we're going to spend the next 60 minutes kind of going in a deep dive into Monaco. And so I figured we would get started with a demo. So we're going to do the agenda in Monaco. So here I am in Monaco, I'm in the workbench. And I thought what I could do is, the cool kids today are all doing Markdown. So I figured I would start by doing a Markdown description of our agenda for the session. So we'll say Visual Studio Online, Monaco. And we'll have a nice little hard return, and we'll say an agenda. It's a little bit boring, I would have to say, though, right? It's just kind of text, not very exciting. Maybe if we could preview it here in Monaco, that would be cool. All right, we have a preview button. You can see the Markdown being rendered, but I still have to swap back and forth. What would be nice if I could actually see the preview while I'm doing my Markdown. So what I can do is split my editor, and I have two instances of the same file open now, and on the right-hand side, I can see the preview of what it is that I'm running. But I actually think it's a little bit ugly still. So it would be really nice if I could take the CSS that I will eventually use to render my Markdown and use that inside the IDE while I'm doing this work. And so one of the things I can do is go to my settings file, and I'll say agenda.css is the CSS file to use when you're rendering my Markdown. And now when I come back into my Markdown editor and I start to type, we'll do an overview and architecture, arch. Let's see, we'll build a Node, HTML, JavaScript app. You can see all of my Markdown is being rendered nicely in the IDE, so I can then start to write and have a very interactive experience. We'll do some, let's see, source code, source management. We'll do some, let's see, we'll build an ASP.NET web app. We'll look at resource management. And at the end, we'll do some tips and tricks. So there's our agenda for the meeting over here. It's still a little bit ugly. Maybe we can spruce it up just a little bit more. We'll put in an image tag. Source equals Microsoft.png. And we'll say the width is 200, and we'll align it to the right. And now we have a nice little image down here. That's cool. How about one more image in here? We'll Shift Alt down, copy that line. We'll move it up to the top of the file. We'll change it to the build logo, and we'll align it to the left. And boom. Oops, what did I do wrong? B. Oop, oh, space in there. Thank you very much. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you build an agenda in Monaco today. And like I said before, I have all the cool kids are doing this today. I actually thought we could go a little bit further. And I could take all the slides that I have today and actually build them in Monaco as Markdown. So I did that, but it turned out it wasn't that exciting to watch me scroll up and down in here. So that's the agenda for today. Let's kind of dig in from there and see where we're going. So when we launched Monaco back in November, this was one of the first tweets that came out. We thought this was we thought it was cool, right? This guy said, hey, it saved my life. And we think that this is sort of very reflective of the way that we think about Monaco today. Monaco is a tool that you can use. It's very friction-free. You can walk up to it. You can make quick changes to your site. You can move on. You can access it from anywhere. And so really today what we wanted to do was build that experience and really get rolling with it. And Louis kind of felt the same way. So we thought that was very cool to see. So what is Monaco? Right? Monaco is a service. It's under the Visual Studio Online umbrella of services. It provides a lightweight, very friction-free, browser-based development experience for Azure websites. And what's very nice about it is that it's tied closely to the platform, to the runtime platform, to Azure websites. And you see a lot of development experiences are coming online these days. They're all over the place. And what they have is basically bring your code to the cloud, do some work on it, and then push your code someplace else. And what's unique about Monaco and the way that we're thinking about it is not only do we have the development experience in the cloud, but we also have the runtime, and we also have the developer services in Visual Studio Online. So the Azure platform we're tied closely to. You have a great development experience, and we have a set of developer services on the back end for tying all these things together. And that's kind of the unique thing that we get with Monaco. Developing in the browser a few years ago, not possible to do. But with the advances in the browsers in the past couple of years, we're able to provide a very rich editing experience. It does not feel like you're in the browser. It does not feel like you're in a text area typing. It feels like you're in an editor, a development environment. And you get a very nice, fast, and fluid experience when you're developing these applications. And you can use all of your favorite languages, your favorite frameworks. You get a nice F5 refresh experience right in the browser. OK, so how is this thing built? Well, it's a service. It's a Visual Studio Online service, but it's not like a centralized service like Visual Studio Online or TFS or source code control in the cloud. We actually install Monaco with every Antares or Azure website. So it's distributed worldwide along with Azure websites. And if you saw David Ebo's talk this morning, I'm sure that he talked a little bit about the fact that with an Azure website, there's this notion of an extension or site extension. And what that does is it lets us add additional functionality to an Azure website. So we install Monaco effectively in every Azure website as an extension. And because it follows that same model, that extension model, the same one that's used for deployment, it's gated by the same deployment protection and credentials to get at that particular endpoint. What's unique about it is we're editing root, right? It's a live edit of the live website. And so when you make changes in there and you refresh the browser and you hit your website, that's the content that's actually getting loaded up in the browser. And it has some challenges. You have to think about it a little bit when you're dealing with source code control, but it also has the advantage of being able to provide that very fast refresh experience. And so when you access your website, there's kind of three ways to get at it. You have your runtime environment, so sitename.azurewebsites.net. And then on the SCM endpoint, which is kind of the development services endpoint of Azure websites, you can go to your sitename.scm.azurewebsites.net/dev, and that's going to be your dev tools. And for the deployment ones, there's the deploy at the end and the Git endpoint. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But when you think about it, you think about your website. It's your sitename.scm.azurewebsites.net/dev. And so that's how we serve up Monaco to you. So we have a very rich development environment, and this is just a quick overview of what the environment looks like. We have this thing we call an app bar on the left-hand side. It provides an explorer of all the files in the file system, again, in root. You can do searching across the entire workspace. What we call all the files is a workspace. We have Git source code control deeply embedded in the experience. We have nice UI experiences, which I'll show you, and plus you can always jump out to the console. You can run your applications, your traditional F5, which is great because you're inside the website. You can run that website directly. We have output windows. We have multiple consoles, so you can do different tasks in the background. This notion of the quick open, so you can quickly navigate through the files. Of course, you can have multiple files open, which I just saw in the last demo, and we have a very rich language experience. Which leads me to the discussion about languages. So we have support for a number of different languages in Monaco. And we have different levels of support for them. And if you look at this chart, the different levels kind of equate to how webby the languages are. And so if you think about sort of the basic support that we have, which is syntax colorization and some formatting, sort of the harder languages, the more desktop traditional languages fall into that category. So managed code languages, JavaScript, no, not JavaScript, Java, CoffeeScript, Jade, all those, we have basic development experiences for those. When you come to the more webby languages like JavaScript, JSON, CSS, we're able to write sort of richer language services that can run inside the browser as JavaScript, right? And so once you have that, then you can start to develop an AST for the particular language, and then we can surface up more and more features inside the development experience. So we call that the good level. And the great level that we have is TypeScript. Because TypeScript compiler is written in JavaScript. We can load that inside the browser to provide that language service. In fact, we use the same language service that we use in Visual Studio on the desktop in the Monaco experience inside the browser. And what's really nice is since TypeScript is so smart about JavaScript, we use the TypeScript language service for the JavaScript language service. So some of those features that you see in TypeScript actually get surfaced up through through the JavaScript development experience, which is very cool. It lets us provide a much richer JavaScript experience inside the browser. So let's go and we'll start building some applications, and I'll kind of take you through what that looks like. And we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to go pretty far with all these different demos. So I'm going to start over in the Azure portal. All right? And so today, you have to kind of jump through the Azure portal to get to Visual Studio Online, and there's some reasons for that. We wanted to make it so that it was a part of your development experience in the Azure portal, but we also needed to protect sort of that endpoint. So what I'm going to do is come over here, and I'll create a new website, and we'll just call it the Monaco Build Demo. Hopefully no one has taken that name yet. Nope. And that's going to go create my website in my Azure portal. One thing you notice, we're running on my free subscription that I get with MSDN. And once that's created, I can go in here to this particular website. There's nothing behind it yet. And I have to go to the Configure tab. Right? So this is kind of the one hurdle that we have right now. And if you scroll down in the Configure tab, you see that there's an option here. It says Edit in Visual Studio Online. And when you stay on with that, you press Save. What actually happens is the portal goes and updates the configuration on the site, which basically opens up that endpoint to us so that you can now browse to it. The reason that we do that is we didn't sort of turn it on by default, is that basically with the credentials that you're providing, the deployment credentials, we're opening up another pipe to www root. So we want to make sure it was a conscious decision that you're making to go and edit this particular website. So now once you go back to the dashboard, and if you go over here in the quick glance section, you sometimes have to pause and wait a second, but an Edit in Visual Studio Online link will appear. And when we click on that link, I'll get prompted for my deployment credentials. And like I said earlier, we're using the same endpoint that Project Kudu uses, and so you have to provide deployment credentials there. You have to provide them here. If you're in Chrome, we actually embed them in the request, so you don't get prompted. But in IE considers this a security risk, so you do get prompted. If I can remember that correctly. Nope. Yep. And so they get prompted, and then if you look at the address that we're going to, right? So now I've got my SCM endpoint, my dev endpoint, and I'm looking at www root. So this is the site that we just created. If I come over here and I browse the site, there's nothing in it, right? It's the new website's created, but there's nothing here site. And here's the page that actually displays that. And if I go and browse that particular page, it's exactly the same thing. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that right now. Excuse me. And we'll start from scratch. Let's go create a new index.html page. And this is our HTML language service. And one of the things that we provide are a set of snippets. So I can see here, I can do CSS, HTML, image tags. So I'll insert a header, basically, for this file. And it's nice snippet support. I can tab through all the different entry points. I can say Monaco demo, and I can tab around. When I'm happy, I can just hit enter. And I'm in the body of the web page that I want to go and edit. So we'll just add a heading, and we have, as you expect, bracket completion on that. We'll say hello from Monaco. And we will go and browse this particular page. Boom, exactly what we expected. Nothing too flashy so far. But we're getting started. It's very quick to go and start to build out this website. So this snippet already says, hey, use a main.css and a main.javascript. So let's go add main.css, and we'll start to write that. And we'll put in a rule for headings, and you can see right away, there's a couple things that are interesting. If I hover over that, I get a do not use empty rule sets warning. We're actually using CSS lint in the background to start to give you some validation, some interesting feedback on what it is you're doing. If I come in here and I press Control Space, we have a very rich IntelliSense for CSS. So I can say background, background color is always my favorite one. And then if I hit Control Space again, we list out all of the colors that you have. So we'll say blue. And you can see in line, we actually show you the picture of the color itself. I can do things like font size, and I get the appropriate IntelliSense for that particular data property value. So we'll say 5em. And now we go back and run our page. Things are starting to look a little bit better, right? Well, that's not so great, but you get the point. So now we're also prompted with main.js, and so instead of watching me do that, I can actually come over here from my desktop where I've got a main.js on my desktop and just drag and drop it, and it'll upload it to my website for me. I didn't have to do anything. So we're going to do a little bit of jQuery here. So let me just grab the script tag and throw it over into my HTML page quickly and go back to main.js. Now there's a few things that are going on here. Let me zoom in here so you can see. One thing you see here, there's an underscore underneath the $. And this is a JavaScript. It's a JavaScript language service. We're using the TypeScript compiler, which gives us much, much richer information. We kind of know that doesn't exist in here. And so one of the things I can do is kind of come in and say, global $. And we say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about that. I know that the $sign is something I'm going to use in my JavaScript. Not a big deal. So that's nice. I can kind of clean up that warning. We come pre-installed or preloaded, or by default, you get IntelliSense for the DOM. So if I come in here and press Control Space, we give you IntelliSense, a very rich IntelliSense experience. So I say window, and I say alert. And as I type in here, we actually give you statement completion and tooltips for all the different parameters. We'll say message, and there we go. Right? So it made it easy to go write the first line of code. We still have a ways to go. So like I said, we're using the TypeScript compiler underneath. That gives us information about what's going on in the file. And so it recognizes that MSG is actually a symbol. If I come in here and put MSG in a comment and I click on MSG, that one doesn't get highlighted in the comment. It's not a symbol. We color writes in orange and reads in yellow. I can even do things like come in here and right-click and say rename symbol. And so we'll say message. Right? And we rename it across the entire file, and we do a safe rename of symbols, not a textual replacement. And what's cool about this, and I don't know if you saw Eric's talk earlier in the week, is we're actually using a thing we call multiple cursors to do this rename refactoring. Right? You can see the cursors blinking in multiple places. In fact, I can come in here and I can press down the Alt key and sort of click around in the file and set a number of cursors to use, and I can say, hey, this is multiple cursors, if I can type. Right? So basically, you get a very, very rich editing experience here in the browser. So let's go and we'll run this page again and see just how great it is. It's blah, blah, blah. Show content. There we go. All right, so we built a nice little application here very quickly in our website. And then, so if I go back over here to my Azure portal and I run and refresh it, it's the exact same page, right? So we're live editing this particular site. So let's kind of take it to the next level, right? This is kind of basic stuff. Let's go well, first off, one of the things that we use to build Monaco on the back end in the server is Node, right? This is JavaScript, TypeScript, Node-based application. So we have great experiences for Node in Monaco itself. So one of the things I'm going to do here is I am going to, over to the console. We have a very rich console experience. I'm going to type in npm install Express. So the Express framework for Node. And we're going to let that run. It's going to take a second. But while we're here, let's kind of talk about the console. I can come over here up in the right-hand corner. You'll notice that throughout Monaco, in the editor, there's always a set of commands that are in the upper right-hand corner. You can find interesting things to do. On the HTML page, you can see that we use that to browse the page. And you'll see things throughout the different file types that we'll use this area for. So I can click on this link, and it'll go and create a new console for me. And this dropdown will actually show me the two consoles that I have open. OK, so we're done over there with Express. Let me get something else running. Express. We'll create an Express app. Oh, wait, don't want to do that yet. All right, so let me just jump back over here quickly. It ran faster than I hoped. So we have multiple consoles, and the consoles are very rich. If I type in help here, you can actually see all the commands that we show or that we have available to you. So you can do your common things like npm node. You can run NuGet on here, PowerShell commands. If you install something using npm and it installs a command, we'll actually surface that up. You can call that. And we actually surface a number of native Windows commands. Now, what's interesting is that this help screen is actually wrong. We actually show you more, or we have available to you more things in the background. So I can do something like touch show help.bat, and then I can say open show, and we'll do control space here because we have IntelliSense in the console. And that'll open up the file in the editor. And I can say help, pipe that to help.txt. And then we will run that. Since we're in a console or a batch file, we have a command here that will actually run it. And that will go run this command. And then over here, you can see that actually what we're doing is surfacing up all of the Windows commands that are available to you up in Azure. Now, we list all of them here. Not all of them are actually available to you. Azure will kind of close those things down for you. But we also, today, are a little bit limited by the fact that we don't have the ability to do interactive dialogues in the console. So if I do something in here like delete star.star, I'll get a prompt that says, are you sure? But I can't actually answer that. So we're going to work on that. We're going to make it much more interactive. But in the meantime, I can do delete star.star, and I can use the quiet option. And it'll clean out that folder for me, which is cool, which is really where I wanted to be at this point. So I'm going to exit out of this console, and we'll jump back into the console that we had earlier. And I'm going to do an express application. I'm going to do a scaffolding, and I'll force it to be put into this particular folder. And this is going to go create a Node Express application. And so I have instructions right here. It says install a dependency, so I'll run npm install. And what that's going to do is then go and look at the package JSON file, and it's going to run npm and install all of those files for me, which is very, very cool. All right, so we're going to let this run for just 1 second. It'll take a little bit longer. There we go. So now we're in a good place. What I'm going to do is click on the Run button. And this is different than just browsing to your application. And I'll show you what happens when I do this. So I'll click on Run. We'll go and we'll load up the old page, and we'll hit refresh. And it's going to refresh and hit the site again. And it should come back with your basic Express template output. But what's interesting is going on over here on the right-hand side. When we said run, what we did was we actually opened up an output window inside Monaco. We put it in a separate window on the side so you can see what you were doing before and, of course, what's going on in your application. And when we ran, when we hit the run button, what happens? We created a web config file for you inside the website. We did things like, where is it? We said that app.js is the startup. We set up, watch files so that when files change inside your application, inside Monaco, the server will be restarted and things like that. Whenever console output gets generated, it'll actually get sent over to the output window. So we can come in here and say, console.log debug info. And when we run this application again, we come back here. You can see here's my debug info message that I prompted or I put inside my code gets generated and put into the output log. And it's interesting because we're actually listening and looking into the file system up on the Azure website, and we're pulling that content out and we're surfacing it up here inside Monaco. All right, so now we have a very simple Express application that's running, up and running, which is very nice. And let's take that a couple steps further. Let's go to app.js. And look at what's going on in here. So first thing you notice, we've got a couple of variables that are not defined or not understood by Monaco. And we could use the same trick. We could do a global process, and that would sort of clear up those errors. But that's not too cool. What we can do is then start to take advantage of TypeScript to give us a richer development experience. So if I come in here and I say var s is string, I'm going to get a warning on this. It's going to say, don't use a TypeScript-specific language construct in JavaScript. This is just kind of reinforcing that we're actually using the TypeScript compiler in the background. So if you start to sort of slip into TypeScript in your JavaScript, we'll let you know. You can do it, but it's just a warning. But what's more interesting, what I really want to do is start to take advantage of something called TypeScript definition files to provide IntelliSense or richer experience inside Monaco. So I'll do an npm install of a tool called TSD, TypeScript Definition Manager is basically what it is. So if you're not familiar with TypeScript definition files, let's go look for definitely typed. Hopefully I'll get that right. So this is the definitely typed project up on GitHub. And what this is a large number of TypeScript definition files that you can go and use. Let's see, KLMNN. I want to look for the node one. And so if you drill in here, you can see there's a declaration file for node v1.0, right? And you could come in here at GitHub, you could copy these things out, and you could paste them back over into Monaco. But that's kind of a pain to go and do. But what TSD does is it lets you sort of manage it inside your project in the same way you use Node Package Manager or NuGet, something like that. So I can say TSD query node action install. And so what that's going to do is go and pull down that declaration file. It's going to create a new folder over here in my workspace and put that file in there. You can see it's in the typings folder. And if I come up to the top of my JavaScript file and I type in control space, and we say reference, we've got a snippet for / references. And what a / reference is basically a hint to us, a hint to the compiler that says, hey, go look at this particular file and use this as a reference point. And so when I hit control space inside the quotes, it'll actually look through the entire workspace and look for any files that might support this. And we know that ours is in the typings node.d.ts directory, right? And we can add that into our file. Why are you doing that to me? Come on. All right, you should not be underlined. Refresh that. OK, that's better. Sorry, I don't know what that little glitch was. But the interesting thing that happened was now that I've got a reference to the node TypeScript declaration file, process and underscore dir name are actually defined in that space for me, and those errors are gone. So instead of just saying, hey, forget about it, we're actually getting a much richer development experience. And so then I can come in here and say something like HTTP and hit dot on that, and now I get IntelliSense, very rich IntelliSense for these particular classes. So that's how you can take things that are in TypeScript and start to bring them into your JavaScript to get a much better, much richer development experience inside Monaco for your JavaScript. And then when you start to migrate or move to TypeScript, you kind of get that all along with you. OK, so that's very cool. Let's go a little bit further, right? So not only do we do rich JavaScript and TypeScript development, but there's more to it, like CSS and less and Sass and things like that. So I've got a style.css file in this project. This is the one that's created for me by default, but I want to take advantage of less. So I can come over here, and I'm just going to hit Control-C and then Control-V over in the Explorer and create a copy of this. We'll rename this one to style.less and create a less file for me. But I don't have any less tools installed, so what we're going to do is go over here to the console. We'll say npm install less, and we'll let that kind of run for a bit. So here's my CSS file. What I can do is come up here, this little T, it's a split editor. This will cause that editor to divide in half. And then what I can do is open up a different file over here. And so we'll open up our less file next to it. So you can see that we've got these two side by side. And so what's cool about less is it provides some sort of a bit of programming to your CSS. So I can create a variable here we'll call my favorite color. And we'll say, blue. And as I type that in, of course, like in CSS, I get blue. We recognize that. And if I want to use that throughout this particular file, I can replace it, and I hit Control Space. My favorite color is listed in there, and then I can start to use it throughout the file. And we've written a very rich language service for less. And so if I click on my favorite color, you can see we, again, highlight reads and writes. If I want to go here and say rename symbol, we actually rename the entire symbol. So I say my fave color is that. We rename it throughout the entire file. And now you can see over on the right-hand side, less has been installed for me. So then we can start to use the less compiler to compile this into CSS. And so we'll go into the directory, cd, and we have IntelliSense for your directory structure in the console. So that's in my public, style sheets, ls. There's my file. So I can say less c. Remember I said before that if you're in the console and you type in help, anything that's installed will show you up in here, so you can see the less compiler is installed. So I can say less c style.less into style.css. We'll run that, and what should happen is you'll see that the style.css file was updated on the left-hand side as we ran that command. So see if we say that's green, we come back over here, we run this again, we should see green over here in the left-hand side. So that's very cool, a very rich sort of dynamic interactive experience you get. But it's also kind of tedious to sit there and have to go and run the less command every time you update a particular file. It'd be much cooler if we could have it sort of automated for us. So let's go install something else called Grunt. So if you're familiar with Grunt, it's a sort of a node task runner. So we'll install Grunt CLI, I can never remember, npm install Grunt CLI. So we're going to go install that. And what this does, what grunt basically does, is it looks at a grunt file. And the grunt file is the thing that sort of defines the task to run. So I've got one that's already written. We'll drag this into my project from the desktop. And we'll take a look at that and see what's in there. And so while that's running, let's open that. OK, that's good. That's installed. Let me install a couple other things. npm install, grunt, contrib, less. And so what happens over here in the grunt file is it says, hey, there's a task. It's called less. Go look in this particular folder. Here's the files. Whenever any one of these changes, run these particular tasks. All right. So that's basically what it is. It's a task runner. And so we're installing the less contribution, which tells grunt what to do with less files. And we'll install the file watcher. So what we can do now is once this is run, we can just run grunt in a console. And we'll let that run. And any time that we make changes to our less file, we should be able to open up our CSS file and see them at the same time. So now we've got less on the left-hand side, CSS on the right-hand side. Let's back up to the root. We'll run grunt on the grunt file. Actually, I don't even have to put that in. And what this is going to do is then start watching. It's going to watch that for file changes. Come on. There we go. And what happens is it's looking for these files, and it's going to convert them into other files. So we can come in here and say, color 2 blue, green, red. And we'll use color 2 over here, function, color 2. Oops, wait a minute. No, wrong file. I'm in the wrong file. I want to use it here. Sorry. There we go. All right. So as we make changes on this side, the grunt file is being watched, or grunt is running and looking for changes. And you'll see them automatically update over here on the right-hand side. So you can set up an environment where you can do your less work. You can do TypeScript. You can do all sorts of interesting things and have the tool in the background actually be running and doing work for you. So that's very nice. But another thing that we may want to do over here is actually run some tests on our Node application. And so a very popular Node test framework is something called Mocha. So you can see what we're going to do. It's the same pattern. We're going to do an npm install of Mocha. And we're going to go to the Mocha site. Let's see, Mocha Node. That should get us right there. The fun, simple, flexible test framework. And let's go grab a little bit of Mocha code. Copy that. And we'll come over here and we'll add a new test.js file. Pull that up to the top. Put our code in there. We've got some errors in our code or some undefined variables. Come on. So again, what we could do is tst query mocha install. And we will do /reference typings mocha.d.ts. And once we do that, our little errors should go away. Did I not get it right? Well, that's a lot of slashes. That's better. OK, errors, go away from me. There, they went away. Nice. So now that I got Mocha installed, I can run my tests. So I can say Mocha, and that will look for any test files in the particular project following that pattern. You can see, hey, one pass, we get the right colorization. And if we made some sort of an error which caused a test to fail, and we run Mocha again, what's very nice is we'll get the output of that. And because we recognize links or URLs inside the console, you can actually click on that, and you'll jump right to where that error is in the file. So very cool, very rich development experience for creating Node and CSS and Java and JavaScript and HTML applications. All right, so let's go back to our slides. So that's demo number 2. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let me talk about source code management for a second. We're going to get a little bit more advanced, right? Everything we've done today, there hasn't been any source code management. We've just been tweaking away at www.root, all right? When we first talked about Monaco, I said that we're installed right side by side with the deployment tools inside your Azure website. And so if you use the deployment services inside Azure, you know that you can deploy through Git, and there's actually a Git repository there that you push into. And if you're in Monaco, you can also create a Git repository in root. You can say git init, and you'll end up basically with a Git repository in Monaco and a Git repository next to it in the deployment area. You probably have a Git repository over in GitHub or Visual Studio Online or someplace on your machine. There's lots of places where you can have source code. And so it's important to sort of think about this ahead of time as you start to develop your applications. There's really two great uses for Monaco today. One is the sort of what we saw earlier or just before this, kind of the getting started, the tweaking the site. You kind of walk up to it, you make some changes, and you let it go, right? It's the guy that had the tweet at the beginning. He just walked up, made some changes, and he was happy. So very good for doing that, just right in place. But if you're going to do some in-depth modifications, you really want to step back and think about how you're going to manage your source code control, especially for projects or applications that require some sort of transformation during the deployment phase. So a really great example of that is an ASP.NET web application, not a website, a web application where you have to do a build and then a deploy. Right? If you just sort of pull all that source code down into your site and you start editing it and you refresh the site, you don't have build outputs, you don't have anything like that. So you have to make sure that you're sort of managing these things. And when you go over here, you can see it on the slide. When you go and you turn on Visual Studio Online, there's a little question mark. If you hover over it, it says, hey, if you've got deployment through source code control turned on, be careful, because you can make edits in your website, and then you could push to that endpoint in source code control, and during that deployment process, it'll overwrite the changes that are in your website. So this is another reason to be very sort of conscious about what you're doing at this point. So let me give you a few strategies of the way that we think about this. So the first way we think about it is really sort of a best practice to go create a companion development site to your production development site. Right? The nice thing is that you're creating a copy. You're running in context. You're not actually, to compare it and contrast it to the desktop, which you have a very rich experience in Visual Studio, but you have to sort of replicate the entire thing on your machine in IIS Express. With Monaco, and you're actually in that website, so you can go create another one and use that to your advantage. So we'll sort of create a couple of maps here and kind of explain what we're talking about here. So we have a production site. We'll call it my site, AzureWebSites.net. And on that one, we don't turn on Monaco, but we do turn on deployment through source code control. We'll say in this case, the local Git repository. So what we suggest is go create a development site. We'll call this one mysite-dev. And on that one, we'll enable Monaco. But we won't have deployment through source code control enabled, and we're not going to push to it. We're going to use Monaco in that case. And so you do your development in this development site. And when you're done, you take that source, well, actually, before you even get started, I should say, in this site, you pull your source code from your Git repository endpoint into your development site. Then you do your work, and you can push it back to your repository. And if you want, you can push it directly to your production website as if it was a local Git repository. So that's one sort of strategy. Another strategy is that you can set up your deployment endpoint in Antares or in Azure to basically watch a branch in a repository. So when you push to GitHub or you push to visualstudio.com, that'll kick off a deployment to your production website. That's kind of an actually better story. You could choose to use a staging site instead of the production site. Some of the great features that have come online with Azure websites over the past few months are the ability to set up these different staging sites. And you set it up in exactly the same way. You say, hey, I want to do deployment through source code control. So whether you do it through a Git endpoint or you do it directly from Monaco, you can push it to staging. And then when you're happy with that, you can do the switch and swap it over, and it'll be live in production. So let me kind of show you what that looks like, or what that model would be. So we'll jump back over to Monaco. And I've got another application or another website here. It's called ThermoCloud. ThermoCloud does not have source code control set up on it, but let me sort of explain what it is. ThermoCloud is my production website. It's a cool website. It's kind of a pointer into my house. And so I have my house all set up, and I've got some web services there, and I can see what the temperature is. You see it's inside 69 degrees, outside it's 55 up in Seattle today. My security system's off. The lights are off, and there's no audio on in the house. But this is a production site, right? I don't want to go and just start tweaking this thing and making changes to it. But I do want to do development with this, development of this site inside Monaco. So what's the approach? How do we want to do that? So what I can do is come over here, and I'm going to go create a new development site. And we'll just start with an empty site. We'll call it ThermoCloud Dev. All right, so development site. Pretty straightforward. You guys go away. We'll go into ThermoCloud Dev. We'll enable editing. And once that's done, we'll go to the dashboard. Same thing, right? Go through the same process. What you find is you end up creating bookmarks of all your development sites, which is cool. ISO remembers my credentials. Now we'll be in this empty website. And there's the hosting start page. But what we're going to do is we're going to go get our source code out of Visual Studio Online. So I've got a repository out there that actually has all this code. So I'll click on this. And what we're going to do is do an OAuth handshake to Visual Studio Online. So my account is chrisdias.visualstudio.com. We'll click on connect. Say yes, we'll give you permissions to do this. This is the same sort of infrastructure you use when you set up deployment through source code control of Visual Studio Online or GitHub or anything from Antares, Azure. Antares is the code name for Azure websites. I apologize for saying that over and over again. And what happens then is it lists all the Git repositories that I have in that up on visualstudio.com. And so we want ThermoCloud from the Build 2014 team project. And we'll click on clone from the repository, and I have to put in my Git credentials here. I'll say save that. We do have some work to streamline our credential gathering experiences, but we're working on it. And so this is just going to do a clone from Visual Studio Online of that application into my Monaco workspace, right? So there's all the files that make up that app. One of the things I don't have inside the repository is my node modules folder. So I'll just run an npm install, and that's going to look at package.json and go and grab everything that I need there, which is very cool. All right, so once that's done, everything should be happy. One second. All right. Well, I thought this would go faster. Actually, you know what I can do? Since that's running, that's actually not going to affect me. Sorry. Let me show you what's going on. So I did an npm install. That loaded up my node modules direct folder, which is cool. So now the application will run. We're talking about source code control here. So I want to talk a little bit about what kind of source code experiences, or source code control experiences we have in Monaco. And so first thing you might notice across the top here, we got this master branch. And if I click on this, I can see that I'm on the master branch. If I want to, I can go create a new branch. So I'm going to create the garden branch. And what we're going to do to our app, we're going to add a new node to that home screen. It's going to be controlling the garden. And so once I create that, and I have now switched to that particular branch inside Monaco, right? So if I come down here and I look at the prompt, you can see it now. It says garden. And I can go and you can run the app, and we should be able to get exactly the same experience as we saw over in our production site. All right, so that's the app. We're on the garden branch. And so let's start making some changes to this. Very simple changes. Let's see. We'll add a new cool button to my app. And I can press the Shift key, Alt key. That'll copy that whole block of code below. I've already got the picture in here. It's called garden. And we'll create a button garden. So this is Jade. If you haven't seen it, it's basically declarative markup. And we're saying, hey, you know what? Here's another button on here. Bind it to this thing called garden. And so that means that I have to come over here to my home controller or rotor and say garden, give it a value. And we'll just say working. All right, so that's kind of the default that happens. Now, if we run this again, we should see a new button, and it should say waiting. All right, so cool. All right, or working, whatever I wrote there before. All right, so the rest of this data is live, and that one's kind of temporary. But we're not going to go and build this entire application. Really, the point is we've made some changes to this app that we're testing out and we're building over here in our development environment. And then we eventually want to push it over to production. And so how does that look? How does it feel in Monaco? So you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, this is our app bar. I mentioned that before. And sometimes there are little badges that will show up when things happen or things to be notified about. So the Git viewlet gives you a little badge. It says 2 files changed. You maybe saw some warnings and things down here on our output window and console window. I think those were browser cache things before. But if I go over here and I click on my git viewlet, I can see it. I've changed these two files. And if I click on index.jade, we actually give you a side-by-side diff right here of the changes that you made to your file. So before you stage them or commit them, you can actually take a look at them. And this is live. You can actually make edits over here if you want to do a tweak. If you really want to go and see inline view, you can switch that view. If you've looked at changes online in Visual Studio Online, and you've seen the diff view there, it's the same control, the same editor that we're using in this case. Switch to side-by-side view. Yep, go back to that way. And in the home file, we can see that we made changes there as well. And so the editor in Monaco has this sort of diff functionality built right in. And it's cool because when you're doing your development, you can actually kind of see what changes you made when you're backed by a Git repository, because we know, like, we can show that there's blue bars here. That's what things have changed. But you can also use it for just sort of generic, hey, I want to go and diff two files. So I've got a TypeScript file in here called data.ts. I'm going to say select that for compare. And over here, data.js, which is the output, and we'll say compare those two. And this is cool because then I can see what the TypeScript compiler compiled from my TypeScript file to JavaScript. I can see that side by side. And it's actually kind of funny because just today, we have to send mail back to everybody. There's this whole big thread on the Visual Studio alias internally. It's like, hey, how do I just do two random file comparisons inside Visual Studio? And there's go to the command line, there's do all these things. And I want to say, hey, just go to use Monaco. You do it right here from the IDE. So we have this sort of very rich diffing experience built right into Monaco. So let's go and we'll stage these two. Actually, I don't even have to stage them. What I can do is just come up here and say add garden. And we've kind of streamlined this process. And what this will do is it'll stage it and it'll commit it for me. And oh, hey, this is interesting. It comes up. What I haven't done is made a configuration to Git on this particular workspace. And so I get notified, hey, I need to specify my name and email. And what we actually do here is inside the editing or the console, we pop up a little embedded editor. And so I can come in here and make some changes to this file. And we'll say, I'm Chris. And Chris. That's my home alias. Oops. And we hit Control Save, and that'll actually update the global configuration file. And then we can just say git commit message add garden. All right, so now we've added it to our garden branch. So that's cool. We made some changes, and now we want to sort of manage it and then push it back. So what I can do then is, now I'm on the garden branch. I can switch back to master. And when I switch back to master, you can see my prompt changes, and I can say git merge garden. And that'll pull that change up into master. Now I'm kind of done. I'm happy. I could run some tests and do all sorts of things, but I don't test my house. I just sort of make changes to it. And now what I want to do is get that off to my production site. And so I'm going to go back over to Azure. I'll go to my ThermoCloud site, and I'll set up deployment through source code control. And we'll just treat it as a local Git repository. Like Monaco, in this case, is just another Git repository, so you can treat it in that sense as something that's on your machine, but it just happens to be up in the cloud. So once we do that, what's nice in Azure, you get the cheat over here. So I can just copy this, copy, and we'll paste that in. And then we will, oh, I didn't have to copy that one. So we're going to push this off to Azure. And we will also push it back to my real repository, which is the origin. But while that's happening, you can see over here in my ThermoCloud production site that the deployment is actually happening, right? Because of the result of that push to that endpoint. And when everything is done, come on. All right, that'll take a second. There we go. Everything's happy. The other thing, I'm just going to push it back so I don't lose these changes. I'll just do push, and then I'll go back to my git push. And so now when we come back over here to our production site and I browse to it, you'll notice that now we've deployed our garden button to our production site. All of that from doing that management of the source code inside Monaco. One last thing I want to point out, I didn't get to use this, but we've just recently added this feature called sync. And so what you can do, what it allows you to do is sort of keep your code very fresh up on the server. So as you're making changes, making commits, you just click on the sync button, and it'll do a pull and a push for you directly. So very, very quick way to do that. All right, so that is developing with companion sites. Let's look at one sort of big enchilada deployment experience or scenario that you can set up. And this is to use continuous deployment. And so in this scenario, really what we've got is we've got a production website. And it's hooked up to do continuous deployment through Visual Studio Online or GitHub. And we want to do development of that in Monaco and push it through Visual Studio Online and have it be built up in the cloud and then pushed to production. And so this is when I talked about earlier, if you've got sites that need sort of large transformations and you're going to do all of this work in the cloud, you want to run your builds, you want to run your tests before you push to production, then using this structure is probably the most robust way to do it. So this is a pretty quick demo. What we've got over here in Visual Studio on the desktop is a standard ASP.NET web application, right? And it says, Monaco Web App Production. And it's a little VB application because I used to work on the VB team. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that application, which is running here, is the Monaco Web App. We'll browse to that. Well, that's coming up. I'm going to go and create the Monaco Web App dev site. Right, so you can see that's the running application, Monaco Web App Production. That's what we saw over on the desktop. You guys can go away. And now that is created, we will go and turn on editing for this. I bet you guys are sick of seeing me click on the Edit in Visual Studio button. I'm sick of clicking on it, but we will work on that. All right. PowerShell, okay. That's a good idea. All right, so now we're back over here. And what I'm going to do is what we did earlier. We're going to connect to VS Online. We will go grab this repository. And this repository is a little bit different, right? Because it's all of our source code. So Monaco Web App from there. All right. Put in our credentials. And we'll pull that in. All right, there's our app. Now if we run this, all right, come on. If we run this, nothing's going to happen, right? Because it's not really an application. Azure doesn't understand what it is. So one of the things you have to do when you have an ASP.NET app is you have to configure it and tell it where the root is. So I can go to the configuration tab. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom here, there is a section that says where the directories are for www.root. And in this case, it's going to be the Monaco Web App folder. All right, so if you look over here in Monaco, we've got the Monaco Web App folder. This is where web config is and all the goodness that's there. So we're going to tell Azure that's where to go and look. So we'll hit save on that. And once that's saved, we'll come back over here. We could run this. It's still not going to work, though, right? But it looks better because we actually got an error back. And that's because I haven't built it. So if I come in here and I say msbuild, which is one of the commands that we offer up in the console, it'll go and actually do the build for me. And you can see the build succeeded. And now if I run it, we should actually see the application running live. There we go, Monaco Web App Production. And so if I want to do something like, we'll go back, where is it? Home, index, and we'll make a change. Where is it? Where is it? All right, there's the code. Say Monaco, we'll say dev. All right, make that change. We'll do something silly like come into our controllers, and we'll add some VB code. If true, then, so you can see that it actually compiles. We'll go back to the console. We'll run msbuild again. Right, we should get a warning here because of the change that we made in our code. So everything's kind of happy here. What we're going to do is we're going to push this. Made changes. Oops, what happened there? demo changes. And we'll push this off to, oh, I got to do that again. All right. I think we'll leave it like that this time. So what this is going to do then is go push it back off to Visual Studio Online. And so that's going to kick off a build. And so if we go to Team Explorer, you can see here's the build definition that gets set up when I created this whole link in between my repository and Azure. And if we double click on this, we should see a queued build, right? So here's the build that we just kicked off, 255. Yep, that's the right one. And so what that's going to do is do the build up in Visual Studio Online. It's going to run some tests if there were tests, and it'll do the deployment out to production for me. All right, so that's kind of the strategy you want to use if you're building sort of rich ASP.NET web applications where you have to do builds and transformations and things like that. Here's a dialogue that did not happen today, which is awesome. Sometimes you run out of resources. By default, we're running in your website. So if you've got a free website, it's got quota limits on it. And the quota limits are really set up for websites. So a lot of traffic in and out, but not a lot of CPU or memory usage. We actually did quite a bit of development today in a free website. But you can run into your quota limits by doing a bunch of things. If you're running grunt constantly, MS build constantly, you may run out of resources, CPU, memory, or something like that. And what will happen is you get put into basically get put into timeout. And your connection to the website, completely the website, will be disconnected. And so Visual Studio Online Monaco won't be able to get to your website. But we'll pop up this dialog and say, hey, you know what? You're running in a free site. You might want to go check the resources there. Wait a couple of minutes. Things will get better. The Azure portal will warn you we're starting to get close to your reaching your quota limits. And of course, if you are doing heavy development and you're constantly running into this, you can upgrade that website that you're doing development into a shared or standard site, and then you get much more resources available to you. So it's just something to be conscious or aware of if you run into that situation. All right, I have 3 minutes left. I have 10 tips and tricks that we're going to fly through. All right, first one, find in folders. One of the things that I mentioned before, let's go back to a more interesting one. One of the things I mentioned before, we have search across the entire workspace. So if we look for cert here in our search window, we get all the results, and you can navigate through them. But one of the things you can do is you can click on this little dot, and you can specify files and folders to go and narrow that search in. Control-click to open to the side. One of the things that you may have seen me do today is things like open up two files side by side. If I hold down the Control key and click on something, we'll actually open it up to the side. Of course, you can always look for the split to open it up that way. Quick Open, which I didn't use at all today, which is a shame. But if I press Control-E in IE, we bring up this window that lets you sort of navigate quickly throughout your entire workspace. So if I start at CSS, and I click on Enter, I'll jump to it. Very rich experience. Let's see, go back here. Control hover to preview. I need a good one. Control hover to preview. I need one. All right, so I'm holding down the Control key, and I'm hovering over Create Server. And what you see is a tooltip that pops up, and it shows you export function, create server, blah, 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 blah. If you have multiple functions throughout your file, we'll actually show you a little bit of code so you can kind of peek around at what you're doing inside, or what your code actually looks like instead of having to jump there. User and team settings. One of the things that I showed you earlier was the ability to set up the CSS for my application, for my Markdown. And so you can have this thing called a settings file. This is a user.json file that we insert in a .settings folder, and it lets you control a number of different experiences across the environment, like line numbers or glyph margin or rounded selection. And one of the things I can also do is put the cursor here and press Control up and down and actually cycle through values. So if you say rounded selection false, you can see that we no longer put rounded corners on there, which we hate. So that's that. Multiple cursors, we saw that one already. Editor commands, those are the things that show up over here, which we saw. Control arrow to cycle through values. We got 2 tips on the last one, which is very cool. Select to compare, we saw that one. Stage selected changes was one thing that we did not see. So let's go. Give me a good one. Let's make a change right here. This is a very bad change, but we'll bring it up. And we look at this file. And so here's the changes that were made. I can actually come through here and just select a set of changes and click on Stage Selected Changes. And only that part of the file will be staged to the repository. And that, my friends, is the end of the presentation. So we have a Channel 9 series, blog post. Turn it on, try it out, let us know what you think. Please send us feedback. Try it out. Thank you very much.